Well, hi there, and welcome to All Over the Place with Dara Star Tucker. I'm so glad to be with you again. I'm enjoying leaning into these interviews. I think we're going to stay in this zone for the summer. I've got a wonderful guest, Elizabeth Booker Houston, who is a mutual of mine online. We recently had the opportunity to connect in person at a conference called Trending Up that I told you all about a few weeks ago. One of my favorite parts of what I do is that I get to connect with these really bright people, and I'm making a lot of these connections in person. So it's a really cool thing to be able to introduce you all to a lot of the people that I have admired and respected online for years now. A couple of quick reminders. I will be at South Jazz Kitchen in Philly on the 21st of July. I'm doing 2 shows. I think the first show is at 6:30. The second show, I believe, is at 8. You can go to southjazzkitchen.com to find tickets, or you can go to the link in my bio on my socials, my Instagram or my TikTok, and you can find the link right there in my bio, which will take you directly to the page for my show. So if you're going to be anywhere near Philly on July 21st, I would love to see you at that show. As I said last time, these shows do tend to sell out, not necessarily because I'm so white hot and popular in Philly, but because the club has a very good following. But I would love to have some folks in the audience who are there just to see me because I want to be able to connect with you guys in person. So go to southjazzkitchen.com to get your tickets or find the link in my bio. I also want to remind you all about the Patreon. That's one of the best ways that you can support my work. Most people just end up contributing $5 to $10 a month. Our community over there is growing larger and larger, I'm so happy to say. If you're looking for a way to substantively contribute to this show or just to support the work that I do in general, Patreon is probably the best way that you can do that. And as always, you can find that link in my bio, or you can go to Patreon, that's patreon.com/Dara Star Tucker, Dara with 1 R, Star with 2, and you can sign up to be a patron. The most recent video that I put in Patreon is really just a life update, kind of letting you know what's been going on with me so far in 2024. It's been a very busy year. So if you're the type of person that likes behind the scenes stuff, you want to get to know the creators that you like a little bit better, Patreon is a great place to do that. I plan to do another update video really, really soon. So I'm going to send you over to this episode with Elizabeth Booker Houston. We are talking about reproductive health. Elizabeth and I talked for quite some time. I am doing my best to condense this episode down into a 2-parter because really it could have been a 3 or even a 4-parter. But we've got part 1 of the talk with Elizabeth Booker Houston. We're discussing reproductive rights. And I'm really looking forward to you hearing this conversation. She's so knowledgeable. I would love for you to give her a follow. She's under Booker Squared on most platforms. So please do give Elizabeth Booker Houston a follow. Remember, too, that there is a visual version of this podcast. Most weeks, I do record a video version and I put that up on YouTube. So if you're someone who listens to the podcast versus watching it on YouTube, if you're ever curious about what a guest looks like, or if you are a learner who kind of prefers that visual element, that's always there for you at youtube.com/Dara Star Tucker. Thanks so much for taking time to hang out with me this week, and I will see you next time. Well, hi there. This is Dara Star Tucker, and welcome to The Breakdown. I'm really glad to be joined today by one of my favorite fellow creators online. First of all, I want to let you know where you can find me. I am on Instagram at Dara Tucker B. You can find me on the KJLH Instagram page at Radio Free KJLH as well. So please do come and say hello. If you enjoy the conversations that you're hearing, I would love to have further interaction with you around those conversations online. And I'm going to give you information on how you can connect with our guest this week. Her name is Elizabeth Booker Houston. She is a lawyer and she is a commentator on various issues around the law, around politics. She has a one-of-a-kind voice that I can only describe to you by allowing you to hear her. So I'm going to play a little bit of her content for you now, and then I'm going to get into a conversation with Elizabeth. So let's hear a little bit of what Elizabeth does online.
The 5 conservative sacks of no-purpose flour and Clarence, who sit on the Supreme Court bench, have made another up decision. In a 6-3 majority opinion released today, they decided that the drawing of a congressional district map in Charleston, South Carolina did not rise to the level of racial gerrymandering, despite the fact that the redistricting pushed out all the black voters. So civil rights groups challenged the map, and the lower court said, yeah, it's pretty racist because we got eyes and we can see. But according to the majority opinion penned by Leaky Alito, he said, oh no, we shouldn't be quick to hurl these accusations. It's just political. You haven't proven that they wanted to be racist. It's all about politics, as if race and politics are not inherently intertwined.
All right, so that's Elizabeth Booker Houston. As I said, she has a one-of-a-kind voice, very smart, very sharp, very edgy commentary. She is also a comedian, very unusual combination of things, which very much adds to her voice and how she presents what she does online. But she's a very, very effective communicator, and I'm just so excited to be talking to her today about reproductive rights. So Elizabeth, welcome to The Breakdown.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here. I'm honored that you would have me. You were hyping me up in that intro. I was like, dang, I sound way fancier than I am.
So Elizabeth, can you, I gave the little cursory introduction and like I always like to say, it's going to be half gushing because this is a dream for me to be able to have these conversations with fellow creators and people that I respect so much, people whose voices I respect so much, people who are so knowledgeable, well-educated. You all are not just online yakking and giving your opinion about things. I mean, there are people who have national television shows who are really not qualified necessarily to be doing what they are doing. But you have graduated from some of the best universities. You have put the time in. You're doing work in the area of law, in the areas that you're commentating on. So can you fill the audience in a bit on what your background is and what led you to be doing what you're doing now online?
I'm originally from Memphis, Tennessee. I was there for first 27 years of my life. I did all of my education there. I have my bachelor's in psychology with a cognitive neuroscience focus on my research. And I'd always had a passion for healthcare policy and advocacy. And the doctors were like, oh, don't go to med school. Don't go get a PhD. Go to law school.
Oh, how interesting.
Like, okay. I was like, but I don't want to go to court. Like, that's all I knew. I didn't really pay attention with lawyers. So I had decided to enroll in law school in June, and I was there in August for orientation. Wow. They said, well, we want to try this new thing where we let students get their law degree and their Master of Public Health at the same time. Want to be a guinea pig? And I was like, okay.
Oh my God.
So I was. So I did my MPH at the same time. Did them both in 3 years. And I got very lucky that my 2L, my second year of law school summer, I was accepted into the CDC's public health law program as an intern, where I got to do things that focused on both my JD and my MPH. And I was trained in things like epidemics, pandemics, quarantine, isolation laws, all of these things, right? Wow. This is 2016.
Wow.
I didn't see what was coming in the future.
Wow.
I applied for a very prestigious fellowship known as the Presidential Management Fellows Program. They only accept 1% of applicants into the program. January, 2 weeks before inauguration, I get my letter saying that I have been selected.
Oh my God.
And I was like, great. And so I always joke that I got accepted during the Obama years. I started my work.
That's incredible.
During the Trump years.
Wow.
And I just was really mad about the whole situation. And I remember a man, when I was standing in line to get in the White House, I remember a man standing in line in front of me. It was cold out. We were waiting to get in through security check. And he said, what do you do? I mentioned being a PMF. And he said, oh my God, that's an honor. Such an honor. You must be so proud. And then he looked at me and he said, it's dark right now, but the sun will rise again.
Wow.
And we need you to stick around. We need you to stick through it because we will need good people after the sun rises again. And then it just completely evolved into, I'm funny too. And I made funny videos. And then summer 2021, I said, let's try getting on stage.
Oh my God.
And that was it. And now I'm a touring comedian. I'm a headliner at this point. And it's kind of insane how that happened because I'd always wanted to be a comedian, but that's a pipe dream.
Yeah.
And I started teaching food and drug law as an adjunct professor, and that has been so fun. So teaching now is a new adventure.
Oh my God. So I want to get into a couple of conversations with you today, just from your particular expertise, and you have the expertise to have so many varied conversations. But I've been doing a lot of work with Planned Parenthood this year and with a couple of other organizations that are talking about reproductive health, coming from a very conservative Christian home, being the child of a minister, grandchild of a minister. we were taught very unequivocally that abortion was like a dirty word. You don't even say this word. You don't talk about abortion rights. These people they're just plumb evil. The Democrats are evil. They're out here just, murdering children. That was the environment that I grew up in. And that was how I was taught to relate to the whole issue of reproductive rights. Well, I've been through my own journey with deconstructing from that very staunch, very structured religious environment. So I've had to begin to question a lot of things about how I grew up and how I was taught about a wide variety of things, including the issue of abortion. So it has been a challenge to me to partner with an organization like Planned Parenthood. I feel like the people leading the conversation tend to be politicians, and they tend to be religious leaders. They tend to be people sort of morally aggrandizing in the comment section or whatever. Those people, in my latest video, I said, these abortion opponents tend to be very loud, but they're actually not in the majority. They're not in the majority. They're very loud, and they don't mind raising their voices and challenging people who disagree with them. They are very loud and proud about how they approach this. And there's a lot of moral judgment, a lot of moral indignation in how they approach this issue. It has a lot to do with kind of the expectations that we put on women and how we view women, how we evaluate women in our culture. It gets very deep once you start to think about how we interact with this issue of reproductive rights in this country. And so when you start to pull away the layers and pull away the veil, it is not so morally unambiguous. It is not as morally unambiguous as many of the people that I grew up with attempt to paint it. Who's leading this conversation? Why do people land where they land? Why are politicians at the forefront of this? Why are men's voices at the forefront of this? There's a whole lot that's wrong about how we are having conversations around reproductive rights. Roe v. Wade was overturned a couple of years ago, and now we're commemorating the anniversary of that decision, the Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health decision that overturned Roe v. Wade. What kind of is your assessment of where we are with protections around women's reproductive health? I know it feels very bleak right now. How are you feeling about where things are?
I think the problem is what you said. A lot of people aren't seeing all of the layers. They're not understanding the big picture. The more I talk to people who are anti-abortion, I realized it was a control issue.
Yeah.
And it was a fear. And so my response, the way that I respond to people who are on the anti-abortion side of things, they say, abortion is bad. I don't like abortion. I always respond with, I don't either, so I don't get them. Do you have to legislate everybody else because you're afraid you're going to get one anyway? Are you afraid that you're going to go against your own morals, and so you have to legalize against everyone else? Because you could just not do it.
Yeah. It's one of those issues that literally you can just abstain from if you don't agree with it. If you don't line up, it's like literally just don't do it. Gay marriage, just don't get gay married. Why is this something that we have to project out on other people? I really actually don't understand.
Yeah, it's a hard thing for me to grasp. But when I say that to them, they always kind of like, well, I'm like, yeah, I don't like abortion either. So I just don't get one.
Yeah.
And they just kind of, that response seems to make people pause a lot of times, but I'm serious. Like, I'm not even trying to be cheeky about it. And that's the issue with the Dobbs decision. So one of the organizations that I've worked with is Abortion Access Front. And they specifically work with what you would refer to as like maybe an indie abortion clinic. So not the Planned Parenthoods, not the big national corporation, but just these small clinics. One of them was the Jackson Women's Health Organization. It was the only abortion clinic in the entire state of Mississippi, in Jackson, Mississippi. That decision came down, and I read it on TikTok Live. I read it. I said, I'm going to read it live, and I'm going to give you my reactions and interpretations in real time. And that's what I did. And everything I've ever learned in law school, I swear, is flying out the window every single day. Wow. Every day. When I would start class for my students, I would say, this is the law as it is today, but I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And that used to not be the case. It used to be that it was very predictable how precedent go. We have had so much precedent overturned in the last few years for illogical reasons. It's scary. And so that's the problem that I think people aren't seeing, is that it's not just going to, and I think they're starting to see it now. It's not just about abortion. Now it's about IVF.
Yes.
Now it's about contraception.
Yes. You know what? I am getting ready to do a video, and I've just gotten so fired up this year about these issues because then you start to realize that the word that you used, that this is all interconnected. You think these are all different issues, and then you start to realize how much of this stuff is interconnected. I just read an article today on Vox, which is one of my favorite independent media outlets. I read an article today about the attack on no fault divorce, on
Hmm.
being able to basically file for a divorce on whatever terms you choose to. There's not, you have to jump through hoops in order to get divorced. Now there's a group of people who are starting to push for it's part of a very broad agenda.
Yes.
Reproductive health has a lot to do with it. This has a lot to do with a group of conservatives, really, who are organizing through organizations and 501c4s or C3s or whatever they're organizing through, like the Heritage Foundation, like the
Mhm.
Federalist Society, which I'm sure as an attorney, you know a lot about Federalist
Yeah, I hate
Society.
them.
Yeah, Moms for Liberty, these types of groups, these political action groups who are organizing to basically, they have been emboldened by the election of Trump, even though he was taken out, but still, who are now experiencing kind of a new wave of energy in this super kind of neoconservative movement to basically take the United States back to a time before, in their minds, before a lot of the corrupting forces, and I'm putting this in quotation marks, before a lot of these corrupting forces, so-called corrupting forces like mass immigration happened, before the women's liberation movement happened, really before the civil rights movement happened, before a lot of things happened that they feel are responsible for the moral deterioration of our society.
Hmm.
And, before this current era, you really heard just a lot of ranting and railing. And, of course, the Make America Great Again slogan, which did not begin with Trump. This was a Reagan era slogan.
Yeah.
You hear a lot of this sort of nebulous, kind of generalized, sloganizing around what it is that these people want. What we're seeing now in the era, really, since you have entered the workforce, is the kind of legal and political application of a lot of these goals. You're starting to understand what their end game is. They are starting to get organized around this stuff on a deeper level than what they ever have, which is why it's infuriating to hear people say things like, well, the parties are all the same, and we obviously all have our issues with the
Yeah.
Democratic Party. We know, a lot of the challenges, but to try to equate the parties in this way, it's becoming more and more stark how different these parties are, the direction that the Republican Party specifically is going in. This Overton window is shifting farther and farther to the right. There are some ideas that have been dormant for a long time that they are now starting to realize they are coalescing around. We're talking about IVF. We're talking about things like divorce. We're talking about things like contraception that
Child
are now.
marriage.
Yes, yes. I lived in Tennessee. I know you're from Tennessee. I lived in Tennessee for 13 years, Nashville. This issue of how young is too young for a child to be married. And there are people who are fighting for this stuff tooth and nail to take us back, to regress to an era that they feel was the era when America was great. Black people were in their place. Immigration was down to a bare minimum. Women knew where to stay. They knew where their place was. White Christian men were in control.
Mhm.
So, from a legal standpoint, I guess, Elizabeth, I mean, how much progress are these folks making, and how concerned are you about this, and how equipped? My question is always, in my comments, people are constantly asking, well, what are the Democrats doing to address this? That's always the issue. It's like, well, they're organizing and they're doing all of this stuff. What are the Democrats doing to address this stuff? And I know this is a very big question, but my feeling in all of this is that they are so much more organized than liberal or left leaning people. Is that your sense at all?
Yeah, that is definitely my sense. And you asked how much progress they're making. A lot.
Yeah.
Quickly.
Yeah.
When I say overturning precedent, I mean left, right, and center. It's not just, we have the Mifepristone case that has come before the Fifth Circuit. That opinion should come down very shortly from the Supreme Court.
And this is
It's not
the abortion pill. They
the
are trying to
abortion
challenge
pill.
the use of the abortion pill, which has been in use for 20 years and has been, every gynecological and obstetrics association has said this is safe, this is effective, this is not, damaging, but they are trying to challenge it as though it is unsafe for women.
That's not what they're challenging, though. Remember how we talked about everything interconnected in the big picture? They're
Mhm.
challenging the FDA's authority to decide if a medication is safe and effective.
Oh, that's so interesting.
It's much broader. It is much broader.
That's
They,
deep.
yes, they are challenging the FDA's authority to decide if medicine is safe and effective. They're trying to take away the ability for scientists and doctors to have the last word
Yes.
so that judges instead can replace it with their decision on what to do about certain medications, which leads back to contraception,
Yeah.
which leads back to a number of other drugs, antidepressants. All of these mothers who are on Zoloft to treat their PPD and PPA and are realizing my husband's trash and I'm trying to leave them. They could change that. It goes so much deeper, and
It
it all
goes
comes
very
down to
deep.
control. It's not about originalism like they claim when it comes to like the originalist interpretation of the Constitution. It is fascist control.
Part of Project 2025, which I mentioned in the video yesterday, has to do with addressing the powers of, as you said, the administrative state. The administrative state. So things like the Justice Department, the CDC, the FDA, these regulatory bodies, the EPA, putting a lot of these bodies under the control of the executive branch, meaning that the president now has jurisdiction over these bodies and can upend a lot of their regulatory power. It gets very hairy, and it starts to get into a lot of the mechanisms behind the way that the government works. And when people start to hear these terminologies, or they hear people try to lay this out, like, look, this is what they are trying to do, a lot of people start to shut down because they don't quite understand what's being said, and it gets all sort of mushy. The Department of Education not being able to do its job without interference from the president, the CDC not being able to do its job without interference from the president, the Justice Department not being able to do its job without interference from the president. This is what we're talking about. These organizations need to be able to operate independently. That's a part of what keeps us protected as consumers. And so this whole idea of Project 2025 being implemented, it's obviously not an official position of the Republican Party, but this is the big picture. This is the overall thing. And as you said, it all goes back to control. It goes back to a very small group of Christian, conservative, white, mostly men or women who are enabling them, wanting to have control over the lives of 300 million people in this country.
Right.
And so I get really people like to push back and say, oh yeah, well, Democrats, they would do the same thing if it was like, well, no, I would not support something like this if it were being pushed by Democrats who wanted to basically upend government and reshape it in their own image. I would not be in favor of that, because most of this is quite anti-democratic.
Right.
And so what is the answer, especially in terms of reproductive health? I'm really trying to keep this conversation focused, and I'm not doing a very good job of it. But what is the answer for more progressively minded people and people who are concerned about this stuff? As I said, this idea of no-fault divorce, contraception. These are things that were settled matters. Reagan signed into law the first no-fault divorce law 40 years ago, more than 40 years ago. So what's the answer for those of us who are more progressively minded and who see this kind of thing as really an existential threat? What's the answer?
Get as much in your state constitutions as possible. That's what we're seeing. That's what we're seeing is a lot of states passing and putting abortion rights and enshrining them in their state constitution. Do the same thing for no-fault divorce. Push for your state and local representatives to put it in there for two reasons. One, it's not going to go to the Supreme Court. Subject matter jurisdiction. I know a lot of people don't know what that phrase means, but it literally means, do they have jurisdiction over this topic? If it's not a federal question, if it's not a constitutional question as far as the U.S. Constitution, it's got to go through your state courts, right? You can insulate yourself in some way. And I know that that's not the most comforting thing for folks who are in red states, but we're seeing it in Florida. We saw people fight to put abortion rights on the ballot in Florida, of all places. So, it can be possible. I think unfortunately that is one way to have like a buffer against things. And so that's why I tell people to please get involved. I know we say it constantly, but you have to be involved in your local politics. You talked about Moms for Liberty. That's a bunch of women who are pushing national fascism thanks to taking over local school boards. They took over local school boards. Local, not federal. And they did it quick.
Yeah.
Run for school board. Get your friend, somebody, run for school board. Like there's so many unopposed seats. That is what I need people to remember. You have roughly 4,000 appointments within the executive agencies by the president. You have federal judicial positions appointed by the president. You have so many of these, the cabinet, right? A lot of people don't put two and two together what the cabinet is. The president's cabinet, his appointees. Those are the people that run the executive agencies. The reason why you can say things like, oh, left wing, right wing, it's the same bird, blah, blah, blah. That's lazy thinking.
It's lazy.
The reason why you're saying, and I'm so sorry to any listeners who are hearing this, but I was a little girl who was obsessed with politics from the age of 8 or 9 years old because I realized how much my life depended on it. That's how I got involved in politics. I was a very sick, chronically ill kid, practically grew up in the hospital. I was on Medicaid. I was on TennCare. I grew up extremely poor in Memphis. And to learn that there was an entire political party that didn't care whether I lived or died, wanted to cut things like Medicaid, didn't think that I had any value in this world, but then called themselves pro-life, right?
Yeah.
That influenced a lot of my thinking there when it came to anti-abortion people, because I realized how many of them were indeed not pro-life because they didn't want me to have free lunch, even though I, grew up in a poor household. They didn't want me to have healthcare, even though I was a very sick little kid. And what was I supposed to do? The callousness of it all.
Well, we're going to have to stop there for now. I hope that you have enjoyed this conversation with Elizabeth Booker Houston. She is a lawyer, she is a public health expert, and she is also a comedian. She brings such a specific knowledge base to these conversations, and we were able to cover so much that I'm going to do a part 2 with Elizabeth. If you want to find her online, look for her on TikTok, on Instagram under Elizabeth Booker Houston. She goes by the username Booker Squared. Find Elizabeth on socials to stay up to date on these very important issues around reproductive health, around the Supreme Court. We're going to have part 2 of this conversation with Elizabeth Booker Houston next week, where we'll continue to talk about reproductive health, but we will also talk about some issues specifically related to corruption on the Supreme Court. This is becoming a bigger and bigger issue as the Supreme Court becomes increasingly conservative. These are issues we should all be paying attention to. I hope we are all plugged in. As I've started to say quite frequently, stay aware, stay informed, check your voter registration. If you go to the link in my bio on my social media, on Instagram or on TikTok, you can find a link in my bio to go to vote.org/Dara to check your voter registration to make sure all of that is in order long before the election happens. As I've said before, they are actively purging voter rolls right now, particularly in swing states, and they know exactly who they are targeting. They know who they do not want to come out to these polls. So let's not wait until October or November to start figuring out whether our voter registrations are in order. Check that now at vote.org/Dara. So I'm looking forward to bringing you part 2 of this conversation with lawyer, public health expert, and comedian Elizabeth Booker Houston next week. Until then, let's learn to shout.